Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History. History 150, Episode 6, the Chief Executive Leader in the Ancient World. So we're going to talk about leaders who are not warrior kings and not protector kings, but the manager, the chief executive. We're going to talk about this later on when we hit like corporations and such, but we see this type of leadership in the ancient world as well. So we're going to do Old Kingdom Pharaohs, Middle Kingdom Pharaohs of Egypt. So basically from like 3000-ish BC to about 1500 BC. And then Darius I of Persia. And a chief executive has to deal with problems of legitimacy, while also dealing with the limitations of rules. Something we really haven't seen much at this point. The early kings make the rules. They're above the law. Warrior kings are able to kind of like do what they need to do. The Assyrian kings changed the entire society because of their reactions to trauma, because the demands of their followers. So we deal with a lot of leaders so far that can bypass rules if they need to. Now, that may sound strange when you talk about pharaohs. Pharaohs are god kings. They have a lot of power, a lot of respect. But there's a lot of limitations as well. Not within the role of pharaoh, not within the power of pharaoh, but within the Egyptian society, within the geography, within the situation. So they are the main managers of a large organization, the chief executive. And usually an organization they do not create. So they can't dictate the rules. They're inheriting rules. They're inheriting ways of doing things. But many of these chief executives need to add a maturity, an infrastructure, a stability to the organization. We see this as in the Disney Corporation, as we go from Walt Disney, who died in 1966, to Michael Eisner, who is appointed chief executive in like 1984. Walt Disney's the creator. He's the idea man. He invents Disneyland, and he invents the animated movie. And he's full of all these ideas. And there's the what would Walt think? Michael Eisner's not that guy. This is Tim Cook after Steve Jobs returns to Apple as the founder, the idea man, the salesman coming back. Tim Cook's not there to invent an iPhone. Tim Cook is there to run Apple and make it $1 trillion business, but not change the world the way Steve Jobs talked about the original Macintosh. Michael Eisner's there to make Disney a large and powerful company with lots of revenue and an entertainment leader. He's there to take what's already there and add the maturity and the infrastructure and the guidance. This is Page and Brin at Google, who are the founders of Google, and move on to Eric Schmidt in the 2000s to make Google into, well, Google. So we'll see that the job is different than a founder. The job is different than someone reacting or creating the structure. They have the limitations of the structure. So the problem of legitimacy for the Old Kingdom. Egypt's safe. All of the places that we've talked about so far have been either at war or they're vulnerable to nomads or something bad can happen. But Egypt in the Old Kingdom in the 2000s BC are safe. They're protected by deserts. They're protected by the Nile cataracts, which means an invading army can't come down the river. There's no need for an army. There's no need for protective walls. There's no warrior or protective kings. Then you have this. The Nile floods for 3 months every year. Egyptian farmers were richer than the farmers in Mesopotamia. And they're pretty happy with the way life is. So you can't scare them. You can't say, I need to tax you in order to build walls because the nomads are coming. I need to force you to provide, to do things, to join an army. We need to invade others. The Nile provides more than enough food. So we don't have to invade Mesopotamia to take their stuff. So the problem for the Old Kingdom is, why do we need a pharaoh? Why do we even need a king? Why? Things are good. Why don't we just do it ourselves? And the answer the pharaohs will come up with, the answer the Old Kingdom pharaohs come up with, is pyramids. Now, they do actual government. They do solve problems between the Nile, between the Delta, the Mediterranean Sea, and the First Cataract. There's an Egypt, and their job is to solve problems. But they're not existential problems the way they are in Mesopotamia, the way they are for the Assyrians. And so, as a justification for existing, they hire Egyptians during those flood times to build the pyramids, to build these giant monuments. It is a way for the pharaoh to get something cool to themselves, to show off their own power, to show off that they're important, but also to show off organizational abilities. The pyramids are a huge logistical issue. Well, everyone, and I always have students who are like, no, they must have been invented by aliens. Like, no, they're fairly straightforward architectural solution. You want to know what the height is? Look at the base. The walls have to be thick at the bottom to hold up all the weight of the stone going up. So architecturally, they're not complicated. But logistically, you need to collect the payments for these workers. You need to provide them with entertainment. You need to build sleep quarters. You need to have health care for guys who get injured on the job. You need a resource supply. You need the stone. At the very least, you need food for these guys. So why would people do this? Well, they're going to get paid well, which is going to make their lives better. For 3 months, as the flood comes to Egypt, there's not much to do. Everything's underwater. Or your farm is 10 feet underwater. So what do? You go. Pharaoh's offering money. You get to do manly work with other men every year. And so fathers will work with sons because they'll be on the job for so long. These are 10, 15, 20-year jobs. They're dependable. They're going to be every year. They get to see the pharaoh up close, getting stuff done. There's a pride in doing this work. And then they get money that they take home. And their lives are better. So they're thankful for Pharaoh. If Pharaoh can get all the stuff done, they're thankful for Pharaoh. If Pharaoh can't, then he looks like a bad leader. And that's bad. Like, his legitimacy is hurt because they're waiting around for the stone. They don't have any entertainment. Their bunks are terrible, full of bugs and they're falling apart. They don't keep the rain out. You're going to blame Pharaoh for all this. So it's Pharaoh's job, his legitimacy, is based on helping these people do a good job. Better executives build bigger pyramids, and size matters. The size represents legitimacy. More people were literally willing to show up to work for you. You had more wealth because you need more stones, you need more food, you need more people, you have more expenses, you have more hireling, you need more stuff. Everything has to be paid for. And then you need time. You need to be Pharaoh a long time. Each Pharaoh builds their pyramid. They're not going to spend a lot of time building someone else's, because they don't know how long they've got. So they're not going to build their dad's or their uncle's pyramid. They're going to spend time building their own. So the bigger the pyramid is, the more legitimacy the Pharaoh had, the more wealth literally went into that building, and the more time, because you only have 3 months per year to get the labor. They're not working on this all year long. These are farmers. Khufu's pyramid is the tallest man-made structure for the next 3,000 years till the cathedrals start going up in the Middle Ages. Khufu's pyramid is the tallest man-made structure. It is 7 times the size of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. The Khufu's pyramid is always the number one wonder in the world. When the Greeks made an itinerary, when the Romans make an itinerary, you have to go see the pyramids. And it took 50,000, give or take, people. Maybe it's 20,000, 25,000. I've seen estimates of 100,000, but it's about 50,000 people, an army. It is literally an army. About 20 years. So that is a massive expense. Khufu not only had to lead the construction, people had to want to work for him. He couldn't be a jerk. Plus, he has to make sure the law is working. He has to make sure people's problems are being solved. He has to make sure if the flooding has destroyed a town, that the town gets rebuilt. He's got regular governmental problems to solve. And he's able to still build the biggest pyramid. So the very size of the pyramid tells you something about the legitimacy of at least the later Old Kingdom Pharaohs. But worse managers are unable to both run the government and be a builder-in-chief. They're simply unable. And it's not hard to understand. We've talked about this with the New Kingdom Pharaohs and the warrior part. Now, the New Kingdom Pharaohs are going to be about 1,000 years later, give or take, than Khufu. But most people are ordinary. They wake up, they do the job, they eat some dinner, they go to sleep. Luckily, they do some things in between. They're not. That's why we a lot of history is Plutarch's parallel lives. It is a great person's history because most people are ordinary. It's why the Greek tragedies are about kings and princes and princesses. They're not about ordinary people. So the worst managers are unable to run the government and be builder-in-chief. So they needed to rely on the nobility to get things done at local levels. They chose between being king and architect and builder. They chose builder. That was where their legitimacy lied, they felt. And so the Pharaoh's pyramids after Khufu get smaller. There's less money. There's less managing because the money's going to the nobility to solve problems locally. The nobles start to build obelisks. These tall needles to the sky. They're nowhere near anywhere close to as big as a pyramid. They don't take that much investment. They are not in competition with they're not telling that they build a tall thing because the pyramids are tall. but we're talking 50 feet, 75 feet tops, to advertise their coolness. The nobles are showing off that they are legitimate too. Now, they're not competing with the pharaohs. They're the pharaoh's homeboys. But they're also showing that they're important. So we see obelisks start to rise as pyramids get smaller. The less managing means less legitimacy for the executive. And so when the last pharaoh died, no one really cared. And what does this tell us about power? What does this tell us about leadership? Is that power doesn't disappear. It just flows somewhere else. Someone else picks it up. There is always a leader. So if the pharaohs weren't good managers, people still needed stuff. There are still followers, and they'll just follow somebody else. So if it's not the pharaohs, it'll become the nobility. A local rich guy. That has the effect of kind of breaking up Egypt from one big state, one big kingdom, into lots of little ones where the local nobility is doing the job locally, but not globally, not for all of Egypt. Now, what happens is there's a period called the First Intermediate Period where the nobility begin to realize that since there's no pharaoh, anyone could be pharaoh. And if anyone could be pharaoh, why not me? And so you get a short period of time of conflict. I'm not going to go so far as to call it war, because we're not dealing with giant armies and a civil war. We're kind of dealing with the gang warfare of early kings. So the Middle Kingdom pharaohs are going to be from Thebes. And the reason why is they were the southernmost big city. And they had a financial advantage because they controlled the trade with Africa up the Nile. So they took that financial advantage. They were able to tax. Sales tax is the most ancient form of taxation. They took that financial advantage and turned it into a military advantage by hiring African mercenaries. So there's a short period of tumult where different nobility families are fighting with each other, but ultimately these princes of Thebes, as they're called, the pharaohs from Thebes, win. And they reconstitute Egypt as a united state. So now they need legitimacy. They have to prove that people should follow them. They're not related to the old pharaohs of the old kingdom. They're a new dynasty. They're a new kingdom. And so they don't pyramid build. They don't maintain the old way of running things because it didn't really work. It worked for a time, it worked for Khufu, but in the end it didn't work, and pyramids were expensive. So this shows us leaders have to change to their new circumstances. What worked for the old kingdom isn't going to work for the middle kingdom because the culture has changed, the situation has changed, the Egypt has changed. So leadership needs to change as well. So again, this limitation. You can't just do what came before. You have to adapt. You have to change as the situation changes. So they're still limited by the situation. They don't have big armies. They don't have armies because Egypt is safe. And again, Egypt doesn't really need a pharaoh. Like the nobility fought each other, but the people don't join giant armies. They don't invade other countries. They go about their lives. Life is good in Egypt. And so what the Middle Kingdom pharaohs decide is two things: infrastructure and culture. They're going to make people's lives better by building things that people can use. And then they're kind of going to tell people about it. They're going to tell people that they're awesome. Middle Kingdom pharaohs are going to build things that help farmers farm. Canals, right? They're going to build dams. They're going to do things that help farmers get water, because that's the number one thing they need. And that allows you to build farther and farther away and farm farther and farther away from the Nile. The second thing is royal mines. They're going to start opening up royal mines in the desert. Why? Because the more gold and more silver you get out of the earth, the less you have to collect in taxes. So the Middle Kingdom pharaohs are going to find legitimacy by spending money to build things for people that people can use, that they can't build themselves, and absorbing the cost, having taxes be less. And then they're going to tell people about how awesome the pharaohs are through plays and stories and culture. So if you question, what has the pharaoh done for me lately? Oh, don't worry, here comes a parade. They're going to set up a stage. They're going to put on plays that tell you what the pharaoh has done lately. The advantage of this is infrastructure is always popular, and free entertainment is super popular, and both are way cheaper than pyramids or armies. It's an efficient form of leadership. You help people, that makes them happier. You tell people you're awesome. Like, that's what lots of leaders do. I mean, we see President Trump do this all the time, right? He's always on Twitter. He's always on Truth Social. He's always telling people how great a president he is. And so lots of people hear that and say, yes, I agree. I think he is a great president. The disadvantage of this is the infrastructure doesn't give you a lot of bang for your buck. It's a psychological thing. People get used to it. So it means a constant managing of expectations. You build a canal, after a little, people are very thankful when it's started and when it's finished. But 5 years after, they're like, yeah, okay, I'm used to the canal. What have you done for me lately? So there's a constant managing of expectations. If you drive down to the Blackwood campus at Kingdom County College, you've experienced this with the 295-42 interchange that started under Obama in like 2009, 2010. And it's still going, and it still creates traffic. And is it much better than it used to be? Yeah. But people are also like, it's not done. And what else can I get? What else? Can't we build something more? This isn't, the be-all and end-all. How can we improve this? So there's a constant means of managing expectations. And then with culture, with the actors and the plays and the stories, and you're telling people how great you are and what you've done, you can never be sure who or how someone hears your stories. This is your Instagram. This is your Snapchat, where you post a picture and you think it says one thing, and someone comes into your DMs and tells you the exact opposite. If you tell a story about how the pharaoh is rich and doesn't have an army, Egyptian peasants might say, that's great. People really like him. I don't want an army telling me what to do. But if you're a Mesopotamian pirate, you hear easy money, defenseless bank. So what happens is exactly that. The Middle Kingdom dies in violence. The leaders were unprepared for the thing that had never happened before. An invasion of the Hyksos using super weapons, the modern chariot, the bronze chariot. What are you supposed to do with that? Well, you kind of shrug and go, they were unprepared for a thing that had never happened. And now you can say, oh, leaders should be prepared for things that have never happened. But why would you? Why would you build the expense? How are you going to get people to join an army? Where are you going to get the horses? How are you going to build the chariots? Why are you going to invest all of this money and then not use it? Just in case someone you've never heard of does something no one has ever done: cross the desert with an army. So what this means is that situations and circumstances change. The unexpected happens. And even the best leaders can be overwhelmed by the unforeseen. We have lived through this with COVID, where a disease starts in China. It starts to spread. The United States kind of goes into lockdown. And I remember we closed the school and everyone was like, it'll be 2 weeks, 3 weeks tops. The disease will flame out. It will as people don't get together, it will stop circulating, and we will suffer for 2 weeks. But in the end, it'll be okay. And a year later, we were still not in school. We had completely converted over to online education. And we were trying to make the best of a tough situation, and people were moving out of cities, and this was a trauma for survivors. And not a week goes by that I don't read something in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Atlantic or the New Yorker that they don't say, here are indications that people are upset, angry, traumatized, still affected by what happened during COVID. So when something unforeseen and terrible happens, it is a trauma for those who survive and requires a massive change in the organization. The Middle Kingdom is going to become the New Kingdom. And the New Kingdom, as we've talked about, is going to be full of warrior kings who are going to protect Egypt. They're going to build armies. They're going to have high taxes. It's a complete change of Egypt into something completely new. Not necessarily better, but new, to a new circumstance. So it's going to now be prepared for the thing that had never happened before. To the best of its ability. Because how do you know what can happen if it's never happened? And the New Kingdom will also die in violence when the Bronze Age collapse happens. How can you be ready for the apocalypse? Right? How? We saw this with the LA fires. How many of those people? They lived in a highly likely fireplace. The Santa Ana winds come every year or every few years. The Palisades Hills were known to be a possible fire zone. But how many people were ready for it? How many people had a go bag? How many people had the water and a change of underwear? How many people had all of their photos backed up online and in the cloud just in case? How many? Probably not that many. Because even the thing that could be predicted sometime in the future is still wary to be prepared for. It's hard to prepare for it. The unexpected is hard. But the never happened before is, and this is also where the LA fires really happened. There's 4 or 5 major fires at the same time. So how can the fire department even begin to deal with it? There's 100-mile-an-hour winds. So the Air Force, the planes that drop water can't take off. The helicopters can't take off. How could you prepare for all of that stuff? How could you prepare for a thing that had never happened before? So that leads us to Darius I of Persia. Darius I is around 500 BC. So 1,000 years after the Middle Kingdom dies is Darius. We have the Bronze Age collapse. We have the Assyrians. The Assyrians die in violence, as we talked about with the warrior kings. We get the rise of the Persians under Cyrus. And we get Darius, who's the third king of Persia. He was the successor to warrior king Cyrus, who was very well liked, and Cambyses, who was not. Cambyses was very violent when he conquered Egypt, and so was not well liked. There's lots of revolts against him. Cambyses is an interesting leader to talk about because he was trapped by trying to be his father, despite being a different person. And we see this from time to time. We see this especially in leadership, where the next generation takes over, and it's kind of the Walt Disney problem. Walt Disney died, and who was to take over? There wasn't another Walt Disney. So his son-in-law takes over, but his son-in-law is not him. His son-in-law is a different person with different values and different ways of doing things, different ways of seeing things. So Cambyses tries to be like his father. He tries to be a conqueror, warrior, king, and it doesn't really work. It's detrimental to him, and it's detrimental to the Persian Empire. We see this if you watch the TV shows Succession and Game of Thrones. HBO, I guess, really likes this idea that the children are not, it's not that they're not as good, though sometimes they, like in Succession, the main character says they're not as good, but they can't be the same because they're different. They have a different way of acting. They have a different way of behaving. They have a different value system. They just see the world differently. And so Cambyses gets a lot of negativity in history for not being Cyrus. But he was never going to be Cyrus. So Darius has problems, just like the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom have. Darius has the problem of he inherits an organization that's not really run very well. It's a massive empire. It stretches from Afghanistan all the way to Europe. It is the largest of the Middle Eastern empires of the time. It's going to be bigger than the Roman Empire. But nobody has spent any time running it. So there's a huge organization, but without the internal connections, the alliances, or really a reason to exist. Why would you want to be part of the Persian Empire? Why? If you're Persian, you get to run the world. Okay, that's nice. But why would anyone else want to listen to the Persians? Darius is also bound by the example of Cyrus. Be nice. Cyrus was nice to people after he conquered them, which means they expect the Persian king to be nice to them. Cambyses was not nice to Egypt, and that was a near disaster. You had constant revolts. The effect of that is Darius comes in. He knows he can't be Cambyses. He knows he's not Cyrus, but the people expect him. The followers expect him to be like Cyrus. That was the covenant. That's the social contract. So he can't really be his own leader. He's got to figure out how to run the Persian Empire and solve the problem of this lack of internal connections while also being bound by the example of Cyrus. So what he becomes is the great builder. He's not going to be a conqueror, though there are parts like in India on the Indus River, or even in parts of Europe, that are conquered while he's king. But he's really known for building Persepolis, a royal capital city in the style of Nineveh, in the style of Babylon. It shows that the Persians are a serious people because they have a serious city. But unlike the Assyrians, who built Nineveh with slave labor to show how tough and how strong the Assyrian Empire was, look at what I could make you do. I could force you to build me a city. Darius hires people. He hires the best and the brightest. He pays well. He has lots of different people interacting. He brings in Indians and Bactrians from the east. He brings in Greeks from the Mediterranean. He brings in Phoenicians to do woodworking. He brings in the people to do their expertise to build a good city. And he wants them to interact. He wants them to talk. He wants them to go, where are you from? Oh, I'm from India. Where is that? 2,000 miles that way. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Ionia. Well, where is that? Oh, that's 2,000 miles the other way. Wait, the Persians own that much? They must be really great. They must be really powerful. The second thing they build is a royal highway system. This is not the Roman highway system. The Roman highway system was built for armies to move quickly from place to place to place. And then was built well enough and wide enough that carts and merchants and trade could use it. That's not this. This highway system is an information superhighway. Think the internet in the 1980s, when the Department of Defense and some super universities were basically the only things on the internet. It's information so that Darius knows more of what is going on in his kingdom than any leader beforehand. Remember, all roads led to Rome? That's kind of this. Lots of the roads will eventually lead back to Darius. So that he knows faster than any king before him what's going on. So what does this show? What examples of leadership does this have? It shows that loyalty can come from money and respect. You pay experts well, and you respect their jobs. You respect their craftsmanship. You respect their ability to do things well. You can expect high standards, but then you pay for it, and you treat them well. The second thing is that information equals solving problems early and quickly before they become bigger problems. If you know what is going on in your organization, you are able to solve problems before they become rot, before they destroy your company, your kingdom, your state, before they get out of hand. Information is incredibly important. That's what Darius is telling us. The third thing he builds is an imperial army, kind of the opposite of the Assyrian army. In the Assyrian army, only Assyrians could join. For Darius, anybody can join. For the imperial army, anyone in this empire can join, which means everyone shares in the victory. Greeks, Phoenicians, Ionians, or Greeks, Bactrians, Persians. That means the Persians take less up front in order to win victories later. They're willing to share money, spoils, slaves. They're willing to share. They're willing to take less up front in order for the organization to succeed. The result is it's a huge army, 250,000 people at its max, at its largest, which means it keeps winning because most armies are 5 to 30,000 people. They don't want to fight a 250,000 person army. They're too big. So it keeps winning. So the legitimacy it has by being willing to share brings it more victories, which brings in more money, which even if the Persians are taking less, they're making more because they're making more down the line. Do you see how this works? This creates loyalty of the non-Persians to help maintain a Persian-led empire. The Assyrians, on the other hand, didn't let anybody share. They didn't let anybody get a little piece of victory. The Assyrians were constantly telling people, you are a loser, not the Persians. The Persians were telling people, we're leading, but you're with us. So why should you revolt? If you're going to get a percentage of the victory, why try to overthrow the Persians? For a lot of people, there's not a great reason to do so. The Egyptians, they're the exception. Babylon, well, Babylon's always big. Babylon's always independent. So there's a long history for those two places. But for other people, you go, hey, life is good. If I'm a Phoenician city on the coast of the Mediterranean, being part of the Persian Empire means I get to trade with the Mediterranean Sea and then sell whatever I get in Europe or Africa to all of the people of the Persian Empire. That's a huge market. Why would I want to be a revolt against that? Especially if I'm only going to lose when this giant army shows up. So it was a way of bringing people into the Persian Empire. The army, the building, the information, all connects people. So what happens to the Persians? A series of defeats. Darius loses battles in far-off Greece. That shouldn't have mattered. He loses. Later, his son will lose. It shouldn't have mattered. It's a far-off place. It's at the end of the world. No one really knows where Greece is. It's 4,000 or 5,000 miles away from India, much less Iran. But it showed those people, the Egyptians and Babylonians, who were rich and powerful, if little poor Greeks can win, maybe they could too. And what happened is that Persian leaders who aren't as good as Cyrus or Darius, people stop listening to them. They're far away. They don't quite need to revolt. They just need to lose the letter. They need to send back a hey, what was your instructions again? And just wait. So you start to lose legitimacy, because if your legitimacy is based on success, and then you find failure in some weird, far-off, risky venture, that can have long-term consequences. It's like being a bank that suddenly, we have seen this kind of happen, that suddenly it's one division that's in a lot of tech stocks or crypto loses money. And what people do is then pull out their money from the bank, because they're like, well, if it's messing this up, if it's messing up their crypto, maybe they're going to mess up the good stuff, the dependable stuff as well. If they're willing to risk defeat and failure in something not really important, what are they going to do with the important stuff? And so if your legitimacy is based on success, failure could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It could have long-term consequences. If you're not a warrior king, don't try to be a warrior king. Lean into your strengths and expectations. Failure is a problem. Slow and steady wins the race. This is the kind of what the example of Darius kind of teaches us, is the slow and the steady, the building of structures. Don't risk them. So what is our summary? Our summary starts with that chief executives have to get stuff done. They got to build pyramids. They got to build infrastructure. They got to build Persepolis and build and connect people. They have to manage expectations, and they have to deliver. They don't have to risk their life in the way warrior kings like Cyrus do or Ramses does. but they are also bound by the rules and limitations of circumstance. Old Kingdom Pharaohs could never build an army. There was never a reason. People would not have accepted the taxes. People would not have accepted the conscription. People would not have accepted an army in Old Kingdom Egypt. Middle Kingdom Egypt had to be different from the Old Kingdom, but still deliver despite the same limitations. Darius had to bind an empire of 20 million people who are not speaking the same language, who are very far apart, who have never lived with each other before. It's too hard to hold together otherwise. So he's got the limitations of, how do I keep this giant heterogeneous thing from collapsing, from breaking apart? So the chief executive is a manager leader, but is constantly in peril of misunderstanding the desires and needs of followers, and thus the terms of legitimacy. We see that with Cambyses. We see that with the leaders after Khufu, who thought, oh, all Egypt wants me to do is build a pyramid, when what Egyptians really wanted you to do is run Egypt, and the pyramid was a nice extra. It was a nice added feature. It wasn't supposed to be the main event. The Old Kingdom Pharaohs allowed power to slip away by focusing on the unimportant. The Middle Kingdom Pharaohs were destroyed by an unforeseen event, by the unforeseen, even as they played a part in creating it, by telling those stories, by letting those stories get out, by those pirates hearing just how great the pharaohs are, but hearing that greatness as a weakness. Darius tried to be a warrior king, conquering India, conquering Greece, instead of staying as his chief executive. And while it doesn't end necessarily too badly for him, his son is then trapped to try to overcome that humiliation of Darius's failures. So he invades Greece and is defeated. And so this failure is compounded into an even bigger failure, which hurts the legitimacy of the Persian dynasty. And so chief executives are limited in what they are expected to get done, but what they're expected to get done, they have to get done. Otherwise, the entire structure can collapse. Does that kind of make sense? I hope it does. So, thank you. This is the end of part 1. So, congratulations, we made the end of part 1. Take care, and I'll see you in part 2.